Okay, hi everybody.
Hello.
So today I want to talk about offence at work and how we manage.
Offence or offence.
We're going to go over defence into offence and being offensive, being offended, and dealing with how people deal with that offence and being prepared to offend others, and generally offence at work. And so often being offended and offending others, they're kind of like two ends of the sides of the same coin, isn't it? And it's like, which one, sometimes it feels like, which one are you prepared to take? Are you prepared to be offended or prepared to offend others? And other times it's more on the count of a decision, particularly in leadership, of am I going to create an atmosphere which might offend people and upset people, might make people feel inadequate, might make people feel bad, but actually it might be what I feel is what needs to be done. So first of all, let's go down to the bottom. What are all the consequences of either not being able to manage offence? I think there's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which talks about courage versus consideration. And if you're low in consideration and high in courage, then you might upset people. And if you're high in consideration and low in courage, then you might accept being offended. In both ways, you're not going to get what you want across the table. And so the simplified way I've looked at that is just how we deal with offence throughout the team in different ways. What different things can it cause, not just from leaders to team, but all the way across the team, especially in today's world. How destructive can people's rights to be offended be, and how destructive can people's right to offend also be?
Yeah, it's a relationship breaker, isn't it? Sometimes some people are more sensitive than other people. Some people are harsher in the way they speak to other people, and I think generally most people understand that. But there's this small thing that can happen that completely obliterates all of the relationship, and they can't see past their offence, or someone can't see where they've maybe said something wrong, which creates sort of disharmony in the team. So that's bad, because it can derail projects, derail what your goal is, what your strategy is, because people are just clashing, because of personality clashes, really.
Yeah, even in, well, to build on that and to take it further to the bottom, I guess you've got situations where people a lot of the times don't know the extent of the offense that they are causing, and can sometimes do things out of ignorance, offend people out of ignorance, obviously, not meaning to be as blunt or as rude or as straightforward as they are. And you've also got the cultural thing in the mix, right, as well, because people from different cultures say things in a different way, right? You've got differences. I mean, in British culture, we can tend to like tiptoe around things a lot. Whereas in other cultures, European, some, US, you tend to be a bit more blunt, and that is respected more. Then you've got, African, wherever, you've got different interpretations on the same thing. So then, someone says something that's okay in their culture or their cultural understanding of society, and someone else, based on their paradigm, chooses to take offense to that. I mean, where do you win? How do you win? It is difficult. And it is a case of, okay, am I prepared to be offended and then act on the fact that I am offended? Or, am I willing to let sleeping dogs lie?
Yeah, and in terms of the management of that offence, how do you, because some people are offending people just by being themselves, and should they restrict themselves? What's the balance? Some people talk a certain way, some people have feel they have to be a certain way to do their job. It happens in every industry, every sector going. Like if there's a bad performance and someone is honest about it, they could offend people. It could be a cultural reason, it could be religious, it could be all of the manner of things that happen in terms of identity in society. And just me having my identity can offend people. Of course, there's things that are blatant discrimination, but there's also some things that just aren't clear. And people can choose to be offended by so many things. How do you manage that in a melting pot of people with so many different things that could trigger them, or they could use to trigger others? Like, what do you even do?
Yeah, I think I take slight issue with the word choosing to be offended. I don't know you can choose whether or not to act or show that you have been offended, but I think it's a difficult thing and such a subjective thing to understand, to say, okay, I'm going to choose to be offended. Well, being offended, yeah, it's so subjective. It's down to people's personal understanding of a thing, which is why, you look out in the world at large and, no one comes to a consensus on this stuff. So when you bring it into the workplace and the fact that people have to work together, it just adds to the complexity on this. It does make it a lot tougher.
I mean,
yeah.
I also, if you're going to have like different, because even between us, we've had different viewpoints about what is allowed to be said at work and what isn't allowed to be said at work. And that was about race stuff. And if you're now talking about sort of opinions and of how you work, or maybe not how you dress, how you work and how you give feedback, that's even harder if we're already going to disagree about what can and can't be said about discrimination at work, which it shouldn't be. But our example was one that I think we disagreed on, what can and can't be said at lunchtime and outside of lunchtime, whatever it was. So if you can't agree on that stuff, then I don't even know how you get to the feedback and the way that you deliver a message, all of that. That's hard to manage unless you've got and made the culture of how you give feedback, about how you managers speak to staff, how staff speak to managers, really, really clear from the get-go. I don't know what kind of company has that.
Like we've seen in the news recently about bald-headedness being akin to sexual harassment, if you label it that way. And what it seems is that where an offence could be maybe defined as something that's against the mark or against the rules, is that we're having to create rules to govern everything, because there's no common agreed. Society is so diverse, which is a good thing, but opinions are so diverse that there's no agreed rules. And so now we're trying to create rules for everything everywhere, which is almost like making the life experience, in some ways it's improving it because there were some things which was wrong before, but it's also creating this sort of like hybrid lifestyle where everything's kind of robotic. And this is the line, and you step that way, if you step that way, it's wrong. And so in a way, as much as it's allowing people to be more themselves, it's also subduing other things. And in the workplace, there are some things which are just business first. And so if you're dealing with business first, and then you're having to balance that off with, of course, you'll realize that your business needs the people, so you can't go around offending people, but it's such a hard thing to manage if it's coming at the expense of one or the other. And that's what I think is a difficulty. So I think in society, I think we should all try our best to live in the most harmony, the most tolerance as possible, even though it's never going to be a perfect society because we're just different. But in the workplace, I think you add an extra variable, which is what we're trying to achieve something. And if your offence comes at expense or doesn't marry up with that, how do you manage that?
But there's such a fine line between offence and discrimination sometimes.
Yeah.
And you can't, like, someone's offence is some other people's discrimination and vice versa. Like there aren't any set lists of this. Well, there's protected characteristics, but then you've got stuff that goes in between, which is the bald-headedness, the thing that you're talking about, which I couldn't see why it was sexual harassment. And I don't know how it got there, but there are things that are clearly, as we develop as a society, that don't fit into just offence and just discrimination. So you've got to be able to work through each of those, because people are incredibly complex, emotional characters. And you have to, if you're working with people, I suppose, have to understand that and mediate.
But it's almost like everything bleeds into the next thing. And so smoking break becomes comfort breaks. What you'll wear your hairstyle as, which in many cultures and society have been asking for a long time, becomes what do you wear? And then you lose control of what people wear to work, which a lot of people would agree with. But then do you have a brand? Do you have a standard? What workplace can enforce what you wear? What can you wear when you're on screen talking to external clients? How can you talk? What language should you use? There's so many different things that start to all bleed into each other, where you can offend people by drawing a line anywhere. And so it's like, now, where is that line? While that line's getting further and further, you have the people who started maybe on this side, they're getting offended at watching the line go over there. And so it's almost like this tennis game that's going on, where it's like, you can't stop it. And I wonder where it does stop, or if there's a way, even, I suppose, within your own company, how do you decide how to govern that? Because society doesn't know how to do it. So how do you, as a leader, a director, a CEO, whatever you might be, how do you decide what the line is going to be in your company? Do you go with what society is doing? Do you wait for society to catch up to you? Or do you watch and wait a while and then say, we're also not going to allow people to talk about bald-headedness, just as a random example. So how do you decide when you say, no, we don't accept that?
I think, so I guess kind of bring it back up to the top now. The way I see it, there are two main criteria that it falls into. You do have a workplace culture, and I think that's one in which you foster the norms within our subset of society. Obviously, you've got some quite extreme workplace cultures, and that's, extreme behavior is acceptable within that culture. But I think you really determine, you really set the pace within your own space. The other thing that does make it tricky, and that does kind of drain all of the color out of the image a little bit is, it's business, and you kind of got to deal in absolutes a little bit, really, to avoid problems. So you do need to kind of get the rules down, and really, as much as possible, I believe, go with those almost dogmatically, really, because anything else leaves too much margin for issues. And it's just trying to get the balance between the culture and what you've got down on pen and paper, so to speak. Hopefully you can find a balance where it's not just a whole team of robots, but also you've got a living, thriving group that can continue to work and flow together.
Yeah, you if it's your company, you, within the rules, obviously discrimination and all of that, you set the tone for your company. And as much as I don't always agree with this, because there are extremes to people when they're leading a company, is if you don't like the culture of that company, you have the right to and the ability to move on. So where we run our company, we're all millennials, which doesn't fit always with how other people like to work, because we're very flexible in how we work. So when we say things to people, they're like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. And then suddenly we'll go back to a little bit of micromanagement, and the tone that we've previously set, people start pushing against. But it's our company. We'll set the tone, we'll set the culture. And I've always said, judge me on my intentions and what I intend to do with the company, how I intend the culture to be here. Sometimes it's going to go wrong. Sometimes we'll make the wrong decisions. But if you're supportive, you're not discriminating people, you are trying to foster good relationships, then that's what you should look at in the round, rather than this one person said this one thing to me. Now I'm upset.
I think there's something you said at the start there, and you've brought up a few times about discrimination, and I think that speaks to where language is very different now, and words are very easily conflated. And so you talk about offence and you very quickly get to discrimination, and everything is on a scale, which as long as there's a hint of something, you can call it that thing. And sometimes it is. So I don't want to be the person to determine how much of a bad thing makes it the worst thing. I'm not that person.
Yeah, I don't think it's black and white. That's the issue.
It's not black and white. But what it's created is a world where my pain is just as valid as your pain, which should, as I say it like that, makes sense. But we also know that not every pain is equal. Not everything deserves a sick day, but at the same time, how can you quantify that? And so opinion is kind of like that. It's like someone telling you they're in pain for something that you might not be offended by, and you're having to manage that and just get into a tricky place in this world where, as Charlie said before, if people aren't choosing to be offended, but rather they just are, when do I get to be the person to decide, no, you're all right to be offended by that, but you're not so much supposed to be offended by that? And I just think that's really tricky. So
that is hard.
Maybe there isn't a solution. Maybe that's a world problem that we haven't really come up with. But the closest you can get to is what you're both kind of saying, is that you have your company and you've almost got to pick your poison and say, well, this is my standard. Have the best intentions, and if people can't deal with it, there you go. But I didn't give any scenarios, and I feel like I should have at the start, but I'm not going to now. I'm going to set up the final question for you guys. I am a manager, and I'm dealing with people being offended by each other for things that I don't necessarily think are offensive. And actually, I think if they took it the right way, might actually improve their professionalism and their work. How would you give me a radical and a more reasonable way of approaching those sort of scenarios?
I'll be reasonable, because I do genuinely believe that this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to mediate those different types of personalities that you've got. That's what management is you're putting people who have come from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of ages, class structure, ethnicity. Your job is to create a team that works together, and you mediate that, and you get them to understand each other from their points of view and within the rules as well.
Radical. Round one. Fight. No, I'm kidding. So I guess the key thing really from what you've said already, Jankee, is about the communication. So then I'm thinking a radical version of the communication. Really, it sounds to me like these are, and I don't know the exact situation, obviously, but these are two people that actually need to properly communicate together. So sit them down and you say, look, you're going to figure this out one way or another, and you don't leave this room until you do. And then you could get extreme with it, right? So you could physically like lock the door, like withhold, normal stuff that they would be allowed during the day. At some point, someone's going to need the bathroom as well. So that could accelerate how friendly people get with each other. I don't know. I think there could be some wiggle room there, but no. In all seriousness, the key is the communication. Really,
they're starting to sound like Squid Games there for a second.
No, I kid. But you've got people that actually, if they understood what the intentions were behind what's being said, or where it's coming from, I think could possibly, in this scenario, get along a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. Even what Charlie just said there, you could take that out of complete context, put it in a situation and go, can you believe what he just said about putting people in a room, employee rights, and
Exactly.
you can really take that and run with it.
Yep.
And that's where you're talking about your intentions, and can we even take a joke anymore? Probably not, to be honest.
And can people take a joke or take the criticism in the sense, that spirit that it's meant, or take the feedback in the way that it's meant, or take the work because it's supposed to improve the work, it's not supposed to be about upsetting you. Maybe in the next one we'll be a bit more direct on some of the points of which I'm thinking of here, and it might help elucidate a bit more. But there's so many situations where people getting the wrong end of the stick. It just creates a whole different event than what actually occurred.
Yeah, we should do some examples. That'll be fun.
Yeah, all right, we'll do that next time. But anyway, thanks for that. I'll chew on what we've said so far and maybe bring some more specific examples for your help next time around.
Cool.